So the sound we heard was the Amber Alert. I did not get it. Some of you did. So maybe at some point you can tell us what it is, then we can all be on the lookout. So it is now time for the President's Report. Please, everyone, give it up for the President of the UA, Susan Frederick Gray, and the Executive Vice President, woo-woo, Carrie Macdonald. It's been a pleasure for all of us to work with them this year.
Oh, it is good to be here today, and it is good to be together. I want to shout out a congregation and some people in the audience that are important to me. My mom and dad are here. They raised me, you know, I'm lifelong UU. There you are. Later, I'll introduce you to Alandria's parents, because they're here too. And I understand that Elliott Chapel, I'm a Missourian, a Missouri native, grew up on the other side of the state in St. Louis at Elliott Chapel, and that there's like 57 people from Elliott Chapel. So thank you all for supporting the UUA and being here. What a time this is. A time when we are all being called into a deeper practice of our theology, living into the call at the heart of Unitarian Universalism for beloved community. A community that practices a radically inclusive and deeply compassionate, anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural, multi-generational faith within and acts powerfully in partnership and solidarity for justice and liberation for all. This call to our faith comes to us in the midst of a time marked by tumult and tremendous pain. Last year, in the months leading up to General Assembly, our association went through a major disruption. UUA President Peter Morales and several other senior leaders resigned, and we grieved for the death of our moderator, Jim Key. Our interim co-presidents, the Reverend Sophia Bentoncourt, the Reverend Bill Sinkford, and Dr. Leon Spencer provided unbelievable pastoral presence, stable leadership, stabilizing leadership, and a call for deeper transformative action, a call to renewal and change for the UUA and for all of our congregations and communities. GA 2017 was a time of truth-telling about the past and the present. We wrestled with and named the heartbreak, the mistrust, the broken promises, and unfulfilled dreams of our faith. And we were also confronted with an increasingly dangerous and dehumanizing political situation in our country and our world. Last year was not the beginning of these challenges. And wrestling with them has been painful and difficult, but it has also been profoundly faithful. In a culture such as ours that loves debate, but runs from conflict that can transform us and runs from discomfort, being faced with our own distance from the beloved community that we espouse is an invitation to real and transformative change. And yes, we have many examples of both succeeding and falling short of this work. My friends, there is pain in change and growth. There is pain in childbirth. There is pain in the resetting of a bone. There is pain that comes in building new muscles. But the most painful wounds are those that go unattended and unnamed. And so we are called to do the attending that these times necessitate, because the stakes are too high if we don't. Right now, the liberating achievements that generations have won are being rolled back. The extrajudicial killing of Black lives by police continues. The assault on the rights of gay, lesbian, bisexual people, on transgender and queer people, on folks living with disabilities, the repeated attempts to ban Muslims, the growing anti-Semitism, the rolling back of reproductive and healthcare access, the separation and jailing of children at the border affront our values. And all of this is fueled by a rising nationalist movement that is proud to claim the symbols and ideology of Nazis and the Confederacy. I witnessed this all too clearly in Charlottesville, Virginia last August, a story that I will tell more about on Sunday morning. We are living in a time in this country when mass shootings are becoming normal, and our global climate is in chaos. Last summer was a devastating season of storms and fires. It moved us to establish a general disaster relief fund, knowing that this will continue. And I am grateful to all of you who donated to that fund and helped us collectively as a covenanted faith show up and support one another in these times of crisis and trauma. As this external heartbreak continues, our internal heartbreak also continues. Unitarian Universalists have been examining the ways that a culture of white supremacy continues to inhibit the fullness and the practice of our theology and each of our liberation and the ability of people of color to thrive in this faith. This year, we have seen how the burden of this institutional change work does not fall equally on all shoulders. This year, we've seen a record number of religious professionals of color face challenges and conflicts in their ministries. Each context is different, but the overall number is troubling and heartbreaking. It is also important to acknowledge the number of religious professionals of color in our movement and how that has been growing. And there are wonderful stories of success. This year's attendance at Finding Our Way Home, the UUA's annual gathering of religious professionals of color for collegial and professional support and education, was the largest in its history. To Unitarian Universalists of color, and Unitarian Universalists with identities that have been marginalized, dismissed, or ignored in this faith, I want to say first and foremost that I am sorry for the hurt that continues to be done. The microaggressions and practices that diminish and discount your leadership, your presence, your dignity, your humanity are real. And the work of changing this reality is for every single one of our leaders and congregations to take up. And as white leaders and members in this faith, we have to shoulder and lift this work. It is not okay for it to rest unequally and unfairly on leaders of color in our movement. to Unitarian Universalists of color, to Unitarian Universalists who hold identities that have been marginalized, diminished, and dismissed in this faith. This is your faith. You know its deep, liberating theology, and you see who and what Unitarian Universalism can be if we live into the fullness of our calling. To each of you, I'm committed to being a partner and an ally so that you see yourself recognized at the center of this faith, and it is felt with a clarity that no one can ever question. What does it take to really live into bold and transformative change? First of all, it requires a clarity of direction and a commitment to the values that must always guide the work. And it also requires diverse leadership and the centering of the margins and a commitment and knowledge about the work of change. It requires skill building and muscle building for this work. At the UUA, we are committed to institutional change work that we are calling the work of inclusion, equity, and change. And we are approaching this work on 3 levels: at the associational level at the UUA, at the institutional level across the broader UU landscape, and at the congregational level. So first, organizationally and internally. Here are some of the first moves that we're making to change the UUA's internal workplace culture and spirit. This fall, we completed a thorough review of hiring practices to implement the diversity hiring goals set by the interim co-presidents last spring. These changes, this is one of my favorite parts, my friends. These changes include putting our theological values in our personnel manual, in our job postings, so people know who we are and the vision we seek to live into. It also means changing requirements for job openings to allow for a broader range of experience to be considered, and creating diverse hiring teams and training hiring managers. We've also embraced collaborative leadership models, including the co-directors for the Ministry and Faith Development Department, Sarah Lammert and Jessica York, and co-directors in the Southern Regional Lead position, Connie Goodbread and Natalie Briscoe. We've put diversity of leadership as a foremost priority, including professional diversity, promoting religious educators and lay leaders into top-level positions at the association. I invited Taquina Boston to serve as special advisor to the president for inclusion, equity, and change, recognizing that in order to live into a multicultural religious community, the commitment needs to live not as a department of the UUA, but at its center, and drive all the work that we do. And I want to say that one of the lessons that has emerged in this work is a reminder that we can do big things at the UUA. The Justice GA, created in response to the boycott in Arizona, is one example. The move from 25 Beacon to 24 Farnsworth is another. This was a major change, and it was guided by the values of collaboration, accessibility, innovation, and environmental sustainability. Our values guided the move, and I am grateful to the leadership of President Peter Morales for guiding and seeing the innovation and the leadership that was needed to move us and help open up new ways of being in our faith. And here's one more piece. So just like our work of dismantling a culture of white supremacy within our faith, the question was not whether we were going to move, but how, right? That's the same right now. It's not whether we are going to move, but how. At the larger institutional level, reaching beyond the staff and the organization of the UUA, we are supporting broader institutional change. First and foremost is the support for the vital work of the Commission on Institutional Change, which is examining the breadth and the depth of the culture and practices of Unitarian Universalism and our congregations, and how we continue to see a real difference in outcomes for members, leaders, and religious professionals based solely on identity. And that is not right. The supportive relationship between senior staff and the Commission is essential to guiding the work of change at the UUA. To the members of the Commission, Leslie Takahashi, Chair, Dero Farrar, Natalie Fenimore, Mary Byron, and Elias Ortega Aponte, and Caitlin Breedlove, I say thank you. Thank you for your leadership and support. And to the congregations that you serve and in which you lead, I say thank you to those congregations and leaders for supporting you in this work. Because we recognize the way that whenever our leaders support the larger association, there is sometimes a sacrifice by the congregations in that. So thank you for your support of the broader mission and the institutional change at the UUA. Number two is the funding of the board's $5.3 million commitment to Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. This is another bold investment in institutional change and has been a key priority this year. Blue is one of the most innovative and exciting ministries in Unitarian Universalism, committed to providing spiritual care for Black UUs, supporting and amplifying the leadership of Black UUs, and providing spiritual sustenance to grassroots justice movements, nurturing within and beyond. You'll hear more about Blue and have throughout this assembly, but I want to share that we have raised in gifts and pledges already $3.1 million towards this fund for Blue. So if you haven't done a promise in the practice collection at your congregation, I invite you to go back home and get it on the calendar, and it will be matched. Your gifts will be matched. Let's get there to $5 million. Let's get there next year, right? Let's fund Blue and get that money there and help them do this innovative ministry. Support the innovative ministry that they are leading. And over the next few years, we need to be building and investing right alongside the commitment to Blue, the resources for the UUA and congregational change work, as well as support for the ministries of Drum and Trust and Equal Access to make sure that we are funding institutional change at the broadest level. It's time to dream big and invest in this faith and its promise. All right, congregations, the most important part, yes? This year has been one of a lot of transition at the UUA. And we are diving deep into examining and shifting our culture, but the truth is, if this change doesn't happen in our congregations, our faith will not be transformed, because it is in our congregations that people find Unitarian Universalism and are ministered by it or are not, right? So that's where the change has to grow. So here's how we're beginning to bring this work into congregations this year. But you know what? It's not just the work of the UUA. We want to be partners in it, but it really belongs to all of you. But here's how we're beginning. We've created a cross-staff team, including the Faith Development Office and the Outreach and Public Witness, to curate helpful resources and skill building for congregations on dismantling a culture of white supremacy. I recommend this page to you, videos, articles, all kinds of things to help deepen your understanding and skill building in your congregation. The Office of Church Staff Finances has put together a resource on staffing for diversity in congregations. And we're also strengthening our commitment to the annual Finding Our Way Home retreat, support for a trust gathering of transgender religious professionals, for Thrive Leadership School for young adults of color. In all these ways, we are trying to build this work. We're also doing an audit of the UUA's many scholarships, grants, and assistance funds for congregations and leaders, making sure that they have a lens of equity, inclusion, and change at the center of those grants. Next year, we have put funds, so this coming fiscal year, we have put funds to invest in training on cultural competency, race, gender, identity, and power dynamics for UUA staff, in particular UUA staff who work directly with congregations, so that we are skilled partners, the skilled partners that you need to nurture the change efforts in your own congregations. And we're looking to invest more in ministerial startups, particularly for congregations who are calling or hiring religious professionals of color. Now, these are just the next steps in the long haul work of nurturing cultural and institutional change. But the work is not just internal. One of the things I learned serving in the ministry in Phoenix was that the cultural change work in our congregation was about educating and building skills internally, but also partnering directly beyond our own congregation with communities directly impacted by oppression. That work of following, showing up in the streets, understanding the realities of the racial and systemic oppression in our country was critical to actually changing culture within. One of the most important ways that the UUA serves the mission of Unitarian Universalism is by amplifying a national voice, moral voice for our values in the world. This year, we've invested in a strategic review of our public witness work and made the intentional decision to center our justice work in solidarity with grassroots organizing that is led by people of color, indigenous people, and folks directly impacted by oppression and injustice. Interfaith work continues, but we are really prioritizing grassroots organizing. In collaboration, I want to share a few highlights as well. In collaboration with Equal Access, we responded to the call to change the ableist language of standing on the side of love and have renewed our justice initiative to be Side with Love. You can get your new t-shirts and stoles online. I bet there's some in the exhibit hall as well. The UUA and the Unitarian Universalists, the UUA and UUs across the country have been showing up and organizing with the Poor People's Campaign in unbelievable numbers, a national call for a moral revival. A campaign with a broad moral agenda that addresses poverty, access to health care and quality education, sovereignty rights for indigenous communities, climate justice, LGBTQI rights, women's rights, and the fight against criminalization, deportations, and expanding militarism, bringing all of these issues together to create a moral revival. Last month, I was arrested along with 19 other UUs as well as other religious leaders on the first day of 40 days of action, with more than 100 UUs across the country taking direct action with that campaign since that first Monday. It's incredible, and it needs to just keep building this work. The examples of our justice work this year go on, but one final one. We see this centering in our justice work, centering with grassroots organizing, in the growing response of Unitarian Universalists to the work of expanding sanctuary through the Love Resists campaign, combating criminalization of immigrants and communities of color. So Love Resists is our justice campaign that is specifically focused on fighting criminalization. And through Love Resists, we are working to end the money bail system, which is the highlight of the public witness this year, led by Black Lives of UU. We also offer education resources, coaching, and spiritual sustenance for those engaged in sanctuary policies, community support networks, and accompaniment programs. Currently, across the country, over 80 congregations are a part of the UU sanctuary movement. 9 congregations, this number changed as of this GA. 9 congregations are currently providing physical sanctuary to individuals or families, and more are ready if asked, and more are accompanying immigrants through the immigration criminalization system, through the court system. And this spring, through the Side with Love campaign, when the U.S. president threatened a caravan of refugees coming to the U.S. border, many UUs opened their homes to sponsor refugees and to show that as hate tries to close our borders, we will open our hearts and our homes. This means that right now, as we see children separated from their parents at the border, that we must be clear that the criminalization of immigrants, migrants, and refugees is the source and the system of the injustice. To be clear, the decisions over the last few days by the president's administration is not a win. It is not a win. Instead, it is clear that their intention is to erect tent cities, to detain families indefinitely, without access to legal counsel, without basic rights. Criminalization is what we must fight. And we must recognize that the U.S. has been separating families and taking children from their parents for a long time. Black families have been separated and continue to be separated by the police state and criminalization in this country. Indigenous families separated, Asian families separated and housed in camps. This has been happening throughout our history. This is not new, but it is also urgent. And we have to be careful when we talk about the growing authoritarianism in our country. I hear people use the language of Nazis and fascism, and some of those terms are accurate, but what I want to be clear on is that what's happening in this country is deeply rooted in the history of this country. It's a re-emergence or a growing emboldening of the Confederacy and the genocide and the enslavement of Black people. Okay, so it's not foreign, but it's urgent right now. And it's moving quickly, as we all experience. So there are 2 mobilizations that are being organized right now, and we've been working with partners on these efforts, and I want to share them. And the UUA and the UUSC, through Love Resists, is amplifying these call-outs. So if you have your calendar in your pocket, in your phone, you can take it out. I want you to write these dates down. July 2nd in San Diego, we have been asked to show up in mass numbers with longtime immigrant rights partners, including Puente, Arizona, who we worked with on Justice GA, longtime partners, to show up on July 2nd in San Diego to call for the end of this criminalization of immigrants and migrants. And June 30th in DC, a national day of action. So there's going to be a mass mobilization in DC, but there will also be events happening across the country on June 30th through Families Belong Together. Again, calling for a change to this zero tolerance criminalization of migrants and refugees. July 2nd, San Diego, June 30th, DC. The foundation of our justice work is the deep call to keep our hearts open in the midst of policies and politics that tell our hearts to be afraid and to cut off from one another, to keep our hearts open in the context of a daily onslaught of trauma, anxiety, and heartbreak, to keep our hearts open to one another. From Love Resists to Side with Love, we are showing up again and again for humanity and for our own humanity, with a spirit of bold and courageous love. All of this internal and external work and the work to come in the years ahead is the work of a tremendously faithful group of people, a tremendously faithful group of people that includes you all in your congregations showing up faithfully for your values. It also includes an incredible team of people that I get to work with at the UUA, the amazing staff of your UUA. I want to take a moment to introduce the person that I have the great privilege to work most closely with at the UUA, the newly appointed Executive Vice President of the Unitarian Universalist Association, Mr. Kerry Macdonald. Kerry's experience and background in public policy, education, government, and economics brings so much to the UUA. His skills in strategic thinking, organizational detail management, and his obvious love for Unitarian Universalism, and his commitment to the way our faith is being called into transformative work make him an excellent EVP. And I am so fortunate, we are all so fortunate to have Kerry Macdonald as EVP.
Thank you. It is such an honor to be working at the UUA at this moment, especially side by side with the UUA's first elected woman president. Susan. Every day, I am grateful to have such a talented, committed, and courageous group of colleagues. If you see them in the hall with that staff ribbon on their name tag, feel free to stop them and say thank you. And I'd like to ask the UUA staff who are here in the hall to rise and body your spirit so that you can show your appreciation for their service to our thank. Thank you all, colleagues. We love you.
And on behalf of Kerry and myself, we are grateful for the leadership of the UUA Board of Trustees and especially the co-moderators who we work very closely with, Barb Grieve and Alandria Williams. What a pleasure it is to serve with both of you. And we are grateful for the work that we are doing as a whole to invite Unitarian Universalists into a larger conversation about our mission and purpose and calling, and how we can be organized not only for impact, but to live more fully into our values. It is a pleasure to work with each and every one of you. Thank you for your service and leadership to the UUA. As UUA president, my priorities for this first year have been to strengthen the relationships across our faith and to put mission at the heart of all we do. I've been blessed to show up and witness and worship with UUs and UU congregations all across this country. It's one of the things I love the most about my job, is being in your congregations and seeing you all across the country. And guess what I'm finding as I travel? Good news comes when we live into our mission. In the past year, congregational giving to the UUA has increased, and adult membership has grown for the first time in years. We are not social clubs, right? We're deeply rooted faith community answering the call to love. This is the power of mission and being mission-focused and how it unleashes vitality in our communities. The messages of decline in religion are a testament to the ways that religious communities have succumbed to cultural and consumerist values and lost sight of a greater mission to heal the world, to side with the poor, the imprisoned, the oppressed, and offer all people a way of living liberated from systems that seek to define and confine us and our relationships. And I want to be clear that as a white person, I am in this work for my own liberation from those systems, right? We are all in this for our liberation, our collective liberation, so that we can all be free. The key to growth and health for our congregations is a recommitment not to be conformed to the dehumanization that infects our society, but to transform it in ourselves and to organize to liberate our society from its destructive exploitation of life and the planet. In this moment, we are being called to imagine and experiment new ways of living our faith, as Sophia Betancourt said last night, to give those dreams wings. We can be a faith where those who have been marginalized see themselves centered. We have to be a faith where those who have been marginalized thrive. We have to be a faith that encourages the fullness unfolding of every person. And indeed, our values, our theology call us to this future. We are called to manifest our Unitarian Universalism as deep spiritual compassion and meaningful resistance. In these times, we must develop a practice of protecting each other. You're hearing that again and again from the safety team, protecting each other, and become a source of the practice of the world that we know is possible and that is longing to be born. This is a time to invest in your faith and your values like never before. This is a time to keep our hearts, our spirits, our commitment, our generosity open while the forces of fear and scarcity and dehumanization swirl around us. This is a time to invest in your faith, your congregations, your communities like never before. This is a time for each of us to answer, how are we going to answer the call and the challenge of this moment? How are you going to answer this call? The way ahead, my friends, my faithful, faithful companions, will not be smooth. The challenges ahead internally and externally are serious. They're life and death. And pain is always a part of growth. We will make mistakes and fall short. Forgiveness and grace will be needed. I know for me, some of answering the call will be on the streets in neighborhoods in Florida and Ohio, canvassing for ballot initiatives that expand voting rights, that give voting rights back to people who have been criminalized, expanding democracy. For you, I hope you might show up in Florida and Ohio on some of these ballot initiatives that are critical for expanding voting rights and democracy. It may also be for showing up for candidates that you are so excited for. I hope for some of you it will be in direct action, resisting criminalization and militarism, like on July 2nd and on June 30th. It may also be in creating rituals of resilience and sustenance that we all need to survive. Creating music that inspires us to joy, tending the spiritual community that is a sanctuary of both rest and resistance and resilience. Wherever you are, whatever your passion, your gift, the feeling of calling in your own heart, say yes to that call. We all need to show up, not all in the same ways, but in ways that we haven't shown up before, with more risk, with more courage, with more care for one another. And I want to thank each and every one of you for how you are already doing this, because I know that you're already doing this. And my heart breaks with your hearts in this time. And my heart is emboldened by your hearts and your leadership and your faith and how I see you showing up. These times are challenging, but we have been readying for them. I think about how when we can't know what's ahead, when we live in times of deep uncertainty and promises of wins and a brighter day right around the corner are hard to imagine and cannot be promised. For me, the question is, well, what am I going to do? I can't control the outcomes, but I can control how I live and where I show up and where I give my money and where I invest my heart and my time. And that is my choice and my power, and is your choice and your power. Focusing on the outcomes may bring us despair. Focusing on what we can do right now and the call from our neighbor and caring for one another, that's what gives us hope. Hope is being able to respond out of our values despite the systems that we live in and work for them in small ways and big ways every day. So I thank you, Unitarian Universalists across this land. Thank you for your commitment, your risks, and your generosity to your faith, to your local congregation and to the UUA, and to how you live your values every day. As your president, it is my unbelievable honor and great pleasure to serve with you in this time. Thank you.